Hi, Karen. I'm glad you're able to make it on here, even if you can't respond back to me. I hope you can hear me. Of course,
Okay,
you're good to go.
all right. Well, thank you, Tyann. For those of you who are joining us, my name is David Herold. I am the County Weed Superintendent for Adams County here located in Council, Idaho. And as part of the Living Rural series that the county extension is doing, Tyann asked me if I would give us a basic quick weeds 101. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we'll run through the slides that I have. And at the end of it, I have my contact information and you can contact me here at the office with any questions that you may have. I also have my email address. We're pretty good at diagnosing and identifying weeds by cell phone pictures. We've had some experience with that. So send us your pictures, send us your questions. We're happy to help. With that, let's get started. Okay. Diane, is that coming through okay so that you can see my slideshow here?
I can see your slideshow, so go ahead and move it to slideshow. You know,
Okay.
boy, Dave, it's acting like it's on a widescreen, so it's cutting off half of it when you have it in slideshow.
Okay.
And so if you want to move it back and just go through the slides one by one.
Let's
in a
do
line,
that. Let's do that.
This way is much easier to see.
How's this view here?
That view is perfect. It fits the screen.
Okay.
Even if it's not in slide,
Okay.
slide mode.
Let's do this then. This'll work for us. Okay. Well, like I say, this is my Weeds 101 presentation. I apologize if you may have seen this before. I've given this presentation several times. I try to keep it updated, but it is a basic overview of what's a noxious weed in the state of Idaho and why you should care about that. So with that, let's dive into some definitions. As it says here, everyone knows a weed is just a plant that's growing where we don't want it. The question is, what's a noxious weed? And for that, here in Idaho, we go back to Idaho Code Title 22, Chapter 24, the noxious weed rule. And the noxious weed rules in Idaho go back probably to the 1920s even. And basically, then the Idaho Administrative Code, Section 020622 and 020303 are how the Idaho state government interprets what Title 22 of Idaho Code set in motion. So the first one is what we have to do, and the second one is how we have to do it. And in the midst of all of that, we have the definition of noxious weeds according to the state of Idaho. And that's any plant having potential to cause injury to public health, crops, livestock, land, or other property, and which is designated as noxious by the director. And that part is kind of important because, for an example, there are some highly poisonous, dangerous plants, but they're not on the noxious list. A few years ago, we had a group down in Boise that wanted to add yew trees to the noxious list because they are incredibly poisonous, and we'd had some winter kill with some deer, elk, and antelope. So
To be
the not,
specific, that was Japanese yew, correct?
yes,
Yeah.
it was. Thank you, Tyann.
There's different types of yew, and
Yeah.
Japanese yew is the,
Right, and that was the one that was the controversial one at the time. So we can see from that, because they decided not to list Japanese yew, we see that the noxious weed designation is partly economic and partly political, as well as public health and ag driven. So it's at least partly a political decision what gets onto that noxious weed list. We currently have 69 species on our list, plus 4 full genera of species. Those 4 are in the broom families: Scotch broom, French broom, Spanish broom. 53 of those species are terrestrial. The remainder are aquatic. And we do have some very serious aquatic weeds here in Idaho that are on the noxious list. Just for a little bit of perspective, the 2001 edition of the weed book only listed 35 species. And when I was a kid farming over the hill here in Lake Fork and McCall, when I was a teenager, thistles were about the only thing that we talked about, worried about. So jet travel, free trade, ATVs, 4-wheel drive trucks, they have not been our friends as regards to importing noxious weeds into the state. Today, we're going to limit our remarks mostly to weeds, but invasive species, which would include insects like this lovely Asian giant wasp here on the slide. Invasive mussels, zebra mussel and quagga mussels, like the boat check stations are looking for. Nationally, that's a $26 billion annually problem as of a study that was done this year. And worldwide, we're looking at $1.3 trillion. Weeds are $25 million a year annually in Idaho, according to the last numbers that I could discover. That's about $13.44 for every man, woman, and child in the state. So break out your checkbook, folks. There was a study done in 2017 in Washington state that showed a potential impact of 1.3 billion annually to the state of Washington from just 23 species. They kind of handpicked those and picked some of their worst threats. But with their orchards and their fisheries, they figured they could rack up well over $1 billion a year.
Dave, I just wanted to be really clear about the fact that noxious weeds is not the same as non-native plants. Correct? There's many
correct.
non-native plants that are okay and are
Yes.
perfectly healthy in our
ecosystem, right? Yeah, a weed tends to be a bully, and they tend to take over and spread out and take up spaces that are better left to some of our native species. And so there are non-native plants, especially crested wheatgrass, for instance, is a good pasture grass, but it's not native to Idaho. But it's not a problem. It doesn't try to take over the world. So it's the difference between that versus jointed goat grass, for instance, which is a threat to all sorts of agriculture.
Mm-hmm. I know that there's always been a lot of miscommunication of people not understanding that just because it's not native doesn't mean that it's bad. That there is good non-native species out there that make excellent forages and fire control. and
Right.
things like that.
And
But
that's an excellent point. Gary and I like to break them out into obnoxious versus noxious. Dandelions, for a lot of people, are obnoxious. They're weeds, but they're not on the noxious list. They're actually really good bee food. And, I made peace with my dandelions a long time ago. I know other people that just go ballistic if they've got a dandelion in their lawn. So part of it's on according to your point of view, whether it's obnoxious or not. And part of it then, of course, when we get to the noxious list, those are the ones that we are required by the law to control on our properties. So, yes, thank you. So Adams County Weed Control is one full-time employee, myself, and then Jerry Mills is my seasonal helper. Adams County consists of 882,000 acres. About 30% of that is private. The other 70% of Adams County is public ground, primarily Forest Service and BLM. Our duties include enforcing the noxious weed law and controlling weeds on those properties that the county is responsible for. In this case, 345 miles of county road. And then we have agreements with the State Department of Transportation, ITD, for the 71 miles of highway here. We supplement what they do along the highway. We also have cooperative agreements with Payette Forest, the BLM, and the State Department of Lands. We're also part of the cooperative weed management area, which consists of agencies and private landowners. And we're an integral part of that. We are the local inspectors for the weed-free forage and straw program, which is intended to reduce the amount of weeds and weed seeds that find their way onto public lands. For instance, during hunting season right now, if you are packing in to go hunting, you're supposed to be using weed-free forage and straw. If someone wants to grow weed-free forage, they can call us and we can assist them with getting into that program and getting that certification for their forage. Then this summer, we were contacted by ISDA, the Idaho State Department of Agriculture, and we were the distribution point for their grasshopper bait. Because as you'll recall, we had a pretty good grasshopper problem this season. Now, currently here in Adams County, we have about 25 species of noxious weeds off of our noxious weed list that we've found and been working on here within the county. And that varies by up or down one or two every year. But since I've been with the department, we've been holding pretty steady at that now.
are you
So this evening,
expecting, sorry, Dave, are you
Pardon?
expecting to be doing grasshopper bait again for next season?
I really don't know. Having a bad year for grasshoppers, according to what they tell me, is at least partly a climate issue. When things are hot and dry like they were this last summer, the grasshoppers are worse. If we have a wet summer or a little cooler summer, it might not become a problem. So best thing I can tell you is when you start to have grasshoppers, contact the State Department of Agriculture down in Boise and talk to the grasshopper lady down there. And she can start working towards making that determination.
That's what I tell people that ask as well. I just didn't realize you were the distribution point this year. I sent everyone to the state so that it could be recorded and then they could get them the bait from there. So,
right.
But I
And
knew
so
it
the
had to be
process, the process is that the landowner needs to contact the state of Idaho, and the state of Idaho, using their criteria, will make the determination whether or not to distribute grasshopper bait. And at that point, they'll call Jerry and I and say, okay, so-and-so is coming in for so many bags of grasshopper bait. And then when they come in, we'll have them do a little bit of paperwork and load them up. But the first step of the process is to contact the State Department of Ag. So I wanted to run through about three, just quickly running through about three examples here of typical weeds that we have here in Adams County. These are admittedly some of our worst problems, but I wanted to demonstrate kind of what we're up against and why these things are on the noxious weed list. So we'll start here today with rush skeleton weed. The last numbers that I have, and they're probably about this 2009 timeframe that these numbers were generated. So it's worse since then. But 6.2 million acres across 15 states and 2 Canadian provinces. We're spreading at 99,000 acres per year as of 2009. This species was first reported in Idaho in 1960 down by Banks. It was a 50-acre patch. The seed came in with some grass seed that was being used and grown for rehabilitation after wildfire. Contaminated seed. They ended up with about a 50-acre patch of according to people who were the service, the landowner, the county, and the State Department of Agriculture, and they argued over who was going to pay for the herbicide. And by the time they settled that argument, that 50 acres had gotten away from them. And now we have 6 million acres as of the mid 80s, and it's growing every year. This weed's a perennial that's dispersed by windborne seed. It also spreads from the roots. The mature plant, of course, can produce 50,000 seeds. They are, as you can see in that middle picture there at the bottom of the slide, they're a little poof ball like a dandelion kind of seed. They're smaller than a dandelion seed. They can travel for miles and miles. I've heard upwards of 15 miles that they can travel in the wind if they get into a thermal. That left-hand picture there is a picture of, that's an excellent picture of the rosette, and then the mature plant there on the right. My note there where I say that 4 counties are lying, in the state of Idaho weed book, here's our 9th edition. This is the current weed book that's published by the state. If you need one, come in and see me. I've got copies. We give them away because we want everybody to have this information. But when you're looking at a weed in this book, you'll see, and I'll try and find rush skeleton weed here. There we go. If you look, you see right there, there's 4 counties down in the corner that claim they don't have rush skeleton weed. They're lying. They've got it down there too, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, can't resist.
It's amazing how much it looks like a dandelion as a rosette.
Those rosettes they're actually closely related. They're an Asteraceae, so they're in the same family with dandelions. The flower is dandelion colored, although but it's the same sort of poof ball flower arrangement, and so it's very similar. One of the diagnostics when you're looking at this rosette here in this left-hand picture, you'll see that the shape of the leaves is slightly different. Generally, I think they're a little glossier green, but one of the real giveaways when they're very small, this center growing node right here in the center of the plant, that's a bright, almost a scarlet red in a baby rush skeleton weed. And dandelions don't have that little red dot in the center of them. So once you get used to looking for them, you can spot them pretty easily. They jump right out at you. One thing to note about this one, because it does spread from the roots, and it is a perennial, those two things limit our ability to control these through cultivation. Burning them, cultivating them, burning doesn't generally get down and kill the roots. Cultivating cuts the roots and spreads them, so you're actually making the problem worse. So this is one of the species where chemistry really is our friend. They can be hand pulled, but when you pull them, you'll have 3 or 4 stems come back. You'll have to pull them repeatedly over the course of probably 4 or 5 years if you've got a mature plant there, before you wear out the reserves, the food reserves in those roots. So they can be controlled by other than chemical means, but you've got to be dedicated about it. Of course, you need to be dedicated about it with chemicals too on this particular species. Here's their bad actors. It's Canada thistle. Almost everyone is familiar with Canada thistle. Grows to knee high to waist high, has these beautiful purple flowers. Sometimes the flowers are white. Glossy green leaves that are heavily dissected, and lots of stickers. So Canada thistle, which isn't actually Canadian, it's European. It arrived in the 1600s. It was one of the very first weeds anywhere in the United States that was the subject of a noxious weed law. I believe New Hampshire passed a noxious weed law in the mid 1700s, saying that you will control your Canada thistle. It's listed noxious in 32 states. Again, like rush, seeds will spread by the wind, and it spreads from the root. Term that refers to its ability, the roots put off some sort of chemical substance that suppresses the growth of competing plants. And so in a very short time, a Canadian thistle patch is not only growing and spreading from those roots, but it's also becoming a monoculture. It crowds everything else out. Root fragment the size of a pencil eraser can start a new plant. And it can survive at least 100 days without sun. It has a tremendous root system. And the seeds, once they're present in the soil, easily last for 10 years or more. This is another one where chemistry is our friend. It can be, small patches can be intensively grazed and stomped. If you can put goats or horses on it, they'll literally stomp it down, but you've got to hold them on there long enough to really get that plant past that 100 days there in order to starve that root system. So a difficult one to control. Our last example tonight is another one that you'll see. We have some spotted and diffuse knapweed here close around Council, but we have quite a bit of it up around New Meadows. And the closer you get to McCall, the worse. Tease my friends in McCall that their city has adopted spotted knapweed as their state flower. It's arrived again probably as a contaminant in seed, early 1900s, probably well over that 5 million acres in the United States figure now. noxious in 14 states. That's another one that's allopathic. The roots put out something. Again, this is in this particular plant. It's not well understood, but it suppresses the growth of competition and creates monocultures. It's a coarse, very stemmy plant. Grazing animals don't like it. It has some use as bee food, but again, there's some very good reasons not to allow your pollinators to become dependent on one of our noxious species. That's not a good thing either. They tend to exploit those monoculture patches and ignore the native food that they have out there. And then if something happens, of course, like I come through and spray it, then the poor little bees are sitting there going, well, where's our dinner now? So it's a problem for a lot of different ways.
I remember as a kid that I would pick these because they are a pretty flower. And so I would pick these for my mom when I was, 5, 6 years old and bring them into the house.
Right.
I grew up right between McCall and Donley, right there in the center near Lake Fork. So yeah, I remember these extremely well as a small child.
Yeah, I actually bumped into, I had to give some folks a hard time. They were cultivating these in their flower beds. And because they're pretty. That's probably another way that a lot of our noxious weeds come to Idaho, is because someone in the past thought they were pretty. They're hardy, they're easy to grow. And so those are very attractive things in garden plants. And unfortunately, some of them are a little too easy to grow and a little too hardy for our situation here. We have spotted and diffuse knapweeds, both found here in Adams County. This summer, we also located a hybrid, which I understand is not that uncommon, hybrid of spotted and diffuse. So you can get a 1-2 punch there from this species. It will generally present as a biennial or a short-lived perennial. It spreads by seed, dispersed by wind, water, livestock, mud on an ATV. If you drive through a patch of this stuff, it just eats that up. It loves to travel on muddy feet, muddy tires, muddy animals. So it's a tough one. This one is a little easier to control through cultivation or digging it. Kind of depends on the size of the infestation. If you just got a few plants, pull them and be done with them. But if you've got a bunch of them, you might want to consider chemical means to control them. Excuse me. Mowing them doesn't seem to work. I've seen these bloom and set seed when they're less than 2 inches tall. Gentleman here in the county was mowing them absolutely religiously. I couldn't complain a bit about that, but they were blooming and setting seed anyway. So mowing doesn't seem to work. These are 3 of the 25 or so species that we have here in Adams County. So the question becomes, what do we do, and what are we required to do? Because the noxious weed law says that we will control these listed noxious species. So under their definition of control in Title 22, we find that controlling them can mean any or all of prevention, rehabilitation, eradication, or modified treatments, which might include chemical or cultivating or burning, controlled burns, all of those sorts of things. So generally what we like to do is come up with an integrated weed management plan. Now, basically that just means have a plan and carry it out. It's not necessarily something that's carved in stone. Weeds are a biological system, and so this is a moving target. So your plan might be to dig them this summer, but next summer you were on vacation that week and you've got more of them, and so maybe you need to mow them and burn them depending on the species. It's basically a plan developed to manage them, control them, or hopefully eradicate them. And this could include, steps to prevent weeds from coming onto your place. If you've got timber property, for instance, this one would be really big if you're going to have somebody come in and log your place. I'd recommend having them pressure wash their machinery before they bring it on your property. Cultural methods might mean the timing. If you're mechanical, might include digging them or cultivating them. Chemical means there are, of course, thousands of different chemical preparations out there as herbicides. And then biological methods, which can include things like this wonderful little goat down here that's chewing on weeds. Biological methods, generally, if we're talking about classical biology, using bugs to control a particular species, that kind of means that you're throwing in the towel. You've admitted that this weed has whipped you, and you're going to have to make friends with it and try and get it to a point through biological controls that you can live with. And that's a whole nother talk. So we'll tackle that another time. Like I say, chemical means, especially with some of these perennials that are root spreaders, chemicals are still our most economical, effective, and safe means of dealing with a lot of these plants. I'll say that my studies in chemistry and toxicology, since I've started working here, used according to label directions. That's critical. Used according to directions, these are safe to use. They are chemicals, even the safer chemicals like we're using nowadays. Modern chemistry is quite good and quite safe, used according to directions. Really and truly, that goes for anything. Gasoline is a horrible explosive if it's not used according to directions. So just kind of bear in mind that if we're working with herbicides, they are chemicals. They do deserve respect and follow the label. And part of the reason for that is that under current federal law, that label that comes on your chemistry, on your chemical jug, your herbicide jug, that label is federal law. Prosecuted if you use it in a manner that is not in accordance with that label. And from a practical standpoint, the dosage for Milestone, for instance, is way different than the dosage for Roundup. A few years ago, I had a fella tell me about he didn't read the labels closely enough, and he loaded his sprayer with Milestone at the same rate that he used Roundup. And his wife hasn't let him in the garden since. Not sure that she ever will. So wiped out everything.
Oh, yeah, that would be a devastation for sure.
Yeah, it's the difference between ounces versus grams.
Right.
With those two chemicals in particular. So yeah, it was pretty awful. So anyway, Like I said before, grazing, cultivation, controlled burning, these all have their place. And a sharp shovel is still my first weapon of choice if we're dealing with a small infestation. That's still our best bet. And then, of course, biocontrol, which typically means using a lot of these weeds are from Europe or Asia, and they were imported frequently as seed. And so the native insects of Europe or Asia that normally help to hold these plants in control, they didn't come over with them. And so under kind of a classic biocontrol scenario, scientists will go back to the native range of this plant and find some of the insects that feed on this plant and import them here. And after a really, really rigorous system of trials to make sure that it's safe for the environment here, they can turn those biocontrols loose, and they do help, occasionally quite dramatically, but almost always to some slight degree, they will help under a lot of circumstances. And these are a great thing for areas like some of our rangelands around here, where you have thousands of acres that is super steep, hard to reach. It's not going to be economic to spray it even by aircraft for most situations. Biocontrol then might be our only viable alternative, and so that's kind of where that was.
Is biocontrol really affordable for a homeowner?
Biocontrol, not necessarily for a homeowner. Adams County, we've had a very active biocontrol program, and occasionally when I get agents that I can release, I will contact an individual landowner if they got a bad infestation. But typically biocontrol is going to be something where you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of acres, rather than your typical landowner situation where you're dealing with, let's say, less than 20 acres. On a dollar per dollar basis, biocontrol on these larger patches is very economic. In fact, Nez Perce Biocontrol up at Lapway, the program coordinated through the state, BLM, and the Nez Perce tribe, and they provide biocontrols to landowners and to county agencies free of charge, which is a huge thing for us. And so we do have an active biocontrol program for spotted knapweed, rush skeleton weed, and leafy spurge. And we've been working on that for, some of my records go back 20 years that we've been working on leafy spurge in particular. So that's where we're at with the majority of it. And I guess the next question would be is, from my standpoint as the county weed superintendent, how can I help? Yes, if somebody's weeds get out of control, the state weed law does allow me the ability to enforce on a landowner that's just refusing to take care of their weeds. I don't like doing that. I'd much rather help somebody work up a schedule and a plan and assist them with planning a treatment on their weeds, because it's their weeds, it's their property, and property values and things like that can certainly be impacted by noxious weeds. So give us a call. Let us come out and walk your ground, help you ID your plants. We can talk about assisting you with a treatment program, figuring out what might work best for your ground and for your goals. every piece of ground is different. So really needs to be something that's thought through and talked about individually. We do have some spray equipment, ATV sprayers and backpack sprayers that we loan out courtesy of the cooperative weed management area. We do, like I mentioned a little bit ago, we give the state weed book out. If you come by, we'll give you a free copy. And of course, give us a call. We'll try and troubleshoot it over the phone. Send me a picture. They're at weeds at CO Adams IDUS, and we can go from there. We want to help. So with that, Diane, any questions or anything like that? I was hoping we'd have a big crowd tonight so we could talk for an hour on just questions and answers, but
I know
Well,
it, but I'm so glad that we got this presentation on a recording, because it is such a good presentation, Dave. It's excellent, and it's just perfect amount of information for homeowners. And so I'm so glad that we have this recorded so that I can share it with other people.
please do.
And so that, I get a lot of weed questions as well. Most of the time I lean on you to help me identify, because even after 8 years on the job, I feel absolutely still completely novice when it comes to weeds, even though I work with livestock. But that's a little bit different. I really rely heavily on you and your office for
That's okay. I still
help.
can't tell a Jersey and a Guernsey apart, and I was raised around them too.
So, yep, that's just how that goes. But I keep those same books in my office. However, I do have to charge for them. So if Dave has got a better deal for you, that's probably the way to go, and I'll keep that in mind when people come into the office.
Sure.
And we have done a lot of weed identification through email and through texting pictures to each other. So,
Yeah.
Dave, I am looking here. It looks like we got something in the chat. Oh, Karen is asking, what should I do before it snows for rush and Canadian thistle?
Okay. Both of those species right now are starting, if you look at them, their tips are starting to brown up. You can almost see the color going down the stems. What they're doing is they're pulling the sugars and carbohydrates out of the leaves and into the root system to overwinter. So right now is actually a really good time to give them a shot of chemical. And you can do that up until, really up until the ground starts to freeze. Probably for another 3 weeks, almost maybe a month even, depending on the weather, of course. I recommend a product called Milestone. Milestone's that one that we mentioned earlier. It's kind of expensive. A quart of it is like $75 or $100. However, in a backpack, I only use 5 cc's per gallon of Milestone. Load Milestone, a good quality surfactant, and then a marker dye in your sprayer, and give them a treatment. Right now would be, well, maybe going to rain tomorrow, so wait until you got a little patch of dry weather. But now's a good time to give them a drink and put them to bed. What they'll do is that chemical, of course, will be drawn down in with those sugars and carbohydrates, and it'll wreak havoc on that root system over the course of the winter. I've seen some pretty dramatic results from fall treatments. So that'd be my recommendation on that. You can do it with 2,4-D, which is much, much cheaper. It's not quite as effective, but the same principle. It's pulling it down and translocating down through that root system. Right now, everything is a one-way street instead of a two-way street. So it's a good time to dose.
Is Milestone available to the general public, or is it?
Yes,
Okay.
Milestone is available. You can probably find it at any of the big farm stores in the valley or at FSC over here in Cambridge. I know they carry it. Milestone is actually one of our safer chemistries. 2,4-D, for instance, is corrosive. If you get some wind drift and get an eyeful, it burns like the dickens, and it can damage your eyes. Milestone, that's really not an issue. It's considered to be practically non-toxic to mammals and wildlife. So it's a useful tool. There are some caveats. If you're treating a hay field, for instance, Milestone might not be the best choice because it does have a residual. And that residual, while that's helpful with suppressing those weed seeds next spring, it can make troubles with hay crop, for instance. So read your labels carefully.
Okay.
Well, all right then. If we don't have any further questions, I'm going to let you wrap us up, Diane. And
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you, Dave, and I will make this available on a private YouTube where you have to have the link in order to get access to the video. This just keeps it from being searchable, and we give the information to the people that need it and not out to the entire world. You know, not all of us
Sure
want to
thing.
be out to the entire world. So if I will send you the link, Dave, so that if you want to send someone to your own presentation, if
okay,
that will work, I will do that as well. And I will probably use this presentation in the near future. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, and I just really appreciate it.
inviting me. Thank you for inviting me. And like I say, I'm going to shut down here and call it an evening. But it's been fun. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Anytime.
thank you. I'm gonna let you go too. Thank you, Karen, for being here. I appreciate you showing up and doing these classes. And I hope to see you next week when we talk about bees and pollinators. So thank you so much.
Very good. All right.
Okay, bye.